Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books and marketing expert covering Ivy League college PANICS reinstates SAT tests as woke students fail. Let's get into the story. Before we do, please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate you guys. Coming from the New York Times, Yale to require standardized test scores for admissions. Officials said test optional policies might have harmed students from lower income families. They're getting a lot of applications, but they're getting applications from people who aren't successful when they get to the college. Lowering standards hurts the student and the college. From the College Fix, Yale University employs nearly one administrator per undergraduate. Growth came after Yale instituted a diversity hiring initiative and pledged to expand DEI offices campus-wide. And Harvard is struggling. Harvard's problem is they can't get donations the way they used to get donations. So now they're going to do a debt offering and they're going to borrow money at high interest rates to make up for the lost donation money. From the Harvard Crimson, Harvard University to enter the debt market for $750 million taxable bond sale. And Bill Ackman will explain exactly what's going on with Harvard's financing because he's a billionaire. He's been fighting with Harvard. He knows all about it. From the New York Times, Yale to reinstate standardized test scores for admissions. Yale University will require standardized test scores for students applying for the class entering in the fall of 2025, becoming the second Ivy League university to abandon test optional policies that had been widely embraced during the COVID pandemic. Yale officials said in an announcement on Thursday that the shift to test optional policies might have unwittingly harmed students from lower income families whose test scores could have helped their chances. Yes, because you could take a whole bunch of students and you could be focused on diversity, but if you don't have standardized test scores so you can compare one student to another student, while you may have a lot of applications, you won't really have a good way to tell them apart. While it will require standardized tests, Yale said its policy would be text flexible, so it's not just going to be SAT or ACT scores. So like Dartmouth and others, they're going back to standardized testing as a way to evaluate students when they apply to the university. Yale's decision, which will not affect students who applied during the current admission cycle, followed a similar decision in February from Dartmouth College. Dartmouth in Hanover, New Hampshire, said an analysis had found that hundreds of students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds who had solid test scores in the 1400 range on the SAT had declined to submit them, fearing that they fell too far below the perfect 1600. In 2022, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology announced that it had reinstated its testing requirement. These institutions remain in the minority. Many decided to keep their test optional policies in place as the pandemic waned. Columbia announced last year it is test optional, and Harvard has said it is test optional through the class that will graduate in 2030. The California University system has enacted a test blind policy, meaning they will not look at scores even if they are submitted. The University of Michigan, one of the country's most selective public universities, announced on Wednesday that it was moving to a test optional policy, which it said was a move to providing access to high-achieving students from all backgrounds. Michigan had previously used a test flexible policy. More than 80% of four-year colleges, or at least 1,825 of the nation's institutions that grant bachelor degrees, will not require SAT or ACT scores this fall, according to the organization Fair Test, which has fought against standardized testing. In 2022, the number of students taking the SAT dropped to 1.7 million, a decline from 2.2 million in 2020. The anti-testing movement has long said that standardized tests help fuel inequality because many students from affluent families use tutors and coaches to bolster their scores. But recent research has questioned whether test optional policies may actually hurt the very students they were meant to help. In January, Opportunity Insights, a group of economists based at Harvard, published a study that found that test scores could help identify lower-income students and students from underrepresented populations who would thrive in college. High scores from less privileged students can signal high potential. Yale in New Haven, Connecticut, said that test scores were particularly valuable in evaluating students who attended high schools with fewer academic resources or college preparatory courses. Jeremiah Quinlan, the dean of undergraduate admissions at Yale, said in a statement that the university had determined that test scores, while imperfect, were predictive of academic success in college. Of course they are! Simply put, he said, students with higher test scores have been more likely to have higher Yale GPAs, and test scores are the single greatest predictor of a student's performance in Yale courses in every model we have constructed. It's always been this way. Yes, Standardized tests gives the school an incredible amount of information about the potential of the student. When students do not submit test scores, the admissions committee focuses on other elements of the student's file, Mr. Quinlan said. Quote, for students attending well-resourced high schools, substitutes for standardized tests are relatively easy to find. Transcripts brim with advanced courses. Teachers are accustomed to praising students' unique classroom contributions, and activities lists are full of enrichment opportunities, he said in the statement. After the Supreme Court's decision last year banning race-conscious admissions, many experts predicted that some schools would use test-optional policies to protect themselves from future litigation. In the cases against Harvard and the University of North Carolina, standardized test scores were used to show disparate admissions treatment for some ethnic and racial groups. Mr. Quinlan said Yale took that into account in its decision over whether to reinstate test requirements. Quote, I think we're pretty confident that we can still run a pretty thoughtful and legal admissions process with this policy, Mr. Quinlan said. We couldn't let that legal concern or let potential litigation impact this important decision. In making its announcement, Yale released the middle range of SAT and ACT scores of its 2020 first-year class. Since Yale instituted a test-optional policy, the university said that roughly half its applicants had not submitted SAT or ACT scores. Applications to Yale and other highly selective schools have spiked as a result of test-optional policies. Yale, which has had an acceptance rate of about 4%, said recently that it had received over 57,000 applications for this fall's admission, a record number and an increase of about 20,000 since 2019 before the pandemic. The increase included a huge number of international students, Mr. Quinlan said. Quote, the quality and quantity were not increasing in lockstep, Mr. Quinlan said. Bob Schaefer, public education director of Fair Test, downplayed the potential impact of Yale's move. Quote, since an overwhelming percentage of future Yale applicants will have taken advanced placement or other exams, which have long been a factor in admissions at super selective institutions, the impact will not be very significant. He did, however, think the new policy could create a barrier to international students, some of whom have complained about limited access to standardized tests. Quote, I think it's safe to say we will see some decrease moving forward, Mr. Quinlan said. We don't want more applications. We want the right applications. Well, that's the right attitude to have. They should want the right applications. But a serious problem at Yale is their ridiculous overstaffing of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion employees. From the College Fix, Yale University employs nearly 1 administrator per undergraduate. Yale University employs more than 3 administrators and support staff for every 4 undergraduate students, roughly 1 administrator per undergrad, according to a College Fix analysis. Over the last decade, Yale added 631 administrators and support staff to its payroll, according to data provided by administrators to the Federal Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System. As the university embraced new DEI efforts, the number of administrators and support staff increased by 13%, from 4,900 to 5,500 between 2013 and 2014 and 2021 and 2022, the analysis found. During this period, the number of full-time undergraduates at Yale increased by about 20%, from 5,400 to 6,500. Meanwhile, the number of teaching and instructional positions compared to students decreased by about 6%, from 403 per 1,000 to 379 educators per 1,000. Under the analysis, administrators and support staff include management, student and academic affairs divisions, IT, public relations, administrative support, maintenance, and legal, and other non-academic departments. The growth of administrators and support staff at Yale can be linked in some part to its efforts to grow DEI on campus. Yale's DEI diversity initiative included a hiring program that aimed to diversify the campus by creating faculty search committees and hosting implicit bias workshops. Quote, the percentage of Yale managers and professionals from historically underrepresented minority groups has more than doubled in the past decade, President Peter Salovey wrote to the campus community on October 2020. But Salovey pledged to do more, and the campus continued to grow DEI efforts after the university pledged $135 million for a diversity initiative in 2020 and moved forward with implementing DEI offices in schools across the campus in 2022. For example, in 2021, the Yale Child Studies Center created a Chief Diversity Officer position. In 2022, the Yale School of Art created a new position, Director of Sustainable Equity and Inclusion. In 2023, Yale's Cancer Center hired a DEI director to increase efforts to hire faculty of color. Yale's interim vice president for communications, Karen Pert, did not respond to emails from the Fix over the last 2 months asking how many new administrators and support staff the university hired to support its DEI initiatives. The fix found 94 named DEI officials across 10 of Yale's 19 schools. Numbers varied widely, with only one DEI official reported at the School of Architecture, but 45 DEI officials at the School of Medicine's Diversity Advisory Council. Yale employs one DEI official in its public health school, 3 in its music school, 3 in its environment school, 4 in its nursing school, 4 in its divinity school, and 11 in its drama school. Yale also employed 5 university-wide DEI officials and 17 at its undergraduate school. The Diversity Advisory Council has 5 vice chairs for DEI, as well as a director of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Also an associate dean for diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging. A faculty director of workforce development and diversity. 3 directors of DEI, a vice chief for DEI, a chief diversity officer, and a department director for DEI. The remaining members of the Diversity Advisory Council have no DEI-specific titles, but help the council in its mission of disseminating DEI-related best practices and enabling department chairs to implement the YSM Diversity Strategic Plan. Asked for a comment on Yale's DEI hiring, conservative scholar Heather McDonald said, "Adding more bureaucrats, diversity or otherwise, will not solve a non-existent racism problem at the school, but it will drive up its already exorbitant tuition. Faculty bias does not stand in the way of greater Black and Hispanic representation among the Yale professoriate. The dearth of qualified minorities in the hiring pipeline is the problem, whether in STEM or in the hard social sciences. Every college in the country is desperately chasing the same small pool of competitively qualified Black and Hispanic PhDs," she said. "There is an arms race in salary offers. Part of Yale's latest gargantuan diversity allocation will go to outbidding other schools for the same inadequate supply of satisfactorily diverse faculty faces. This is a grotesque waste of money." But she added, the growth of DEI bureaucrats is not the only problem. Quote, "Conservative critics of higher education risk overstating the importance of official DEI bureaucrats in creating today's left-wing campus orthodoxies. The faculty, curriculum, and the students themselves are equally to blame. A university's mission is not to fight alleged racism or other claimed social ills. It is to pass on a cultural inheritance and to create new knowledge through the rigorous testing of hypothesis and evidence," she said. And Harvard is in trouble. They're not getting the donations they need, so they need to go and borrow the money. Luckily, they have their friends at Goldman Sachs to help them out. Bill Ackman explains, "The substantial majority of the Harvard endowment is invested in illiquid assets, principally private equity, real estate, and venture capital. Not reflected on the balance sheet are commitments to new funds of the same type." So what he's explaining is like illiquid assets are things like not cash, not stocks, investments in businesses, investments in real estate, things that you can't immediately turn into cash. In addition to that, to be invested in these funds, an endowment, like Harvard's endowment, needs to not only make investments into these things, but they need to commit for usually years to make additional cash investments. And they were going to be doing that like they normally would with all of their donations. But their donations have really dried up. Like most endowments, Harvard models expectations of fund distributions when considering its liquidity and when making future commitments. Harvard also makes assumptions about inflows from alumni donations. The model likely did not predict a decline in liquidity events from private equity, real estate, and venture capital, and the dramatic decline in donations. That is likely why Harvard announced this recent bond offering, which is being done in a substantially higher interest rate environment than where the funds could have been raised a couple of years ago. It would be interesting to understand how much of the modeled cash flows have declined since original expectations. I wouldn't be surprised to see Harvard announce a substantial cost reduction program soon. So Bill Ackman is suggesting that even raising $750 million in debt won't be enough for Harvard to keep up with its obligations and its overall investments. Ackman continues, "I suspect that alumni donations won't be coming back for some time. At a minimum, alumni will want to know who the next president is and the status of DEI and anti-Semitism on campus before resuming donations." So Harvard needs to raise hundreds of millions of dollars, which probably won't even be enough, according to Bill Ackman, for them to keep up with their expenses. Yale needs to go back just like Dartmouth and MIT did and insist their applicants provide standardized tests proving that they actually belong going to that school. The institutions are starting to crumble, which is good. We need to see these guys crumble faster and get back to the basics of focusing on merit and treating their students equally. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another video. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.